Welcome back, everybody. We're a few minutes late. Fire me. What can I say? All right, with that, let's get started with our afternoon agenda item, our 2026 to 2028 Chub Mackerel Specifications. Julia, whenever you're ready.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully you're not all tired of hearing from me yet, but this will be my last presentation for the day. So the objective for this discussion is to review the current stock status, management, recent catch and landings, AP input, staff monitoring committee recommendations, and SSC recommendations, and then recommend 2026 through 2028 specifications. And the recommendation for you all is to maintain status quo specifications. But first, I will walk through some kind of background information on that. So Chub mackerel is very data limited. We do not have a stock assessment. We did get a data update this year from the Science Center, so we are very appreciative of them being able to pull that information together. There's more details in the briefing book, but what I thought might be most relevant to think about is the information on trawl survey catches of chub mackerel. And it shows that there's no catches in the spring survey, but periodic catches in the fall survey. And this figure shows all of the fall trawl survey catches from 1963 through 2024 and numbers of fish to kind of give you an idea of where they're mostly caught in the trawl survey. And so the data update indicated that, it's very sparse information. There's many years with no survey catches. The stratified mean catches are generally very low, and there's no overall pattern in the time series. So this probably isn't super useful for something that would give us stock assessment information, but it's still useful, I think, to see at least the distribution of where the stock is caught in our region. We've had management measures that were first implemented through Amendment 21 that added chub mackerel to the mackerel squid butterfish FMP. It was first managed in a temporary way through the forage amendment, and then it became a stock in the mackerel squid butterfish FMP with an ABC and all the other required measures for stocks in the FMP. So those measures have been in place since 2020, and the ABC that is part of that package is 2,300 metric tons or 5.07 million pounds. This was first recommended by the SSC in July of 2018 as part of development of that amendment. And it's been reviewed every single year since 2020. And each time the SSC has recommended no changes. Because it's such a data poor species and we don't have a stock assessment, the SSC agreed that an OFL cannot be specified, and instead the ABC is based on their expert judgment. It's loosely based on the historic high for landings and assumptions about discards. They noted it prevents the fishery from reaching its historic high, but allows higher landings than all other years. And it's unlikely to result in overfishing given the general productivity of the species worldwide and low fishery capacity in this region. So next I will walk through how we start with the ABC and get to all the other catch and landings limits that are part of the annual specifications package. And again, all of these numbers have been unchanged since 2020 when the stock was first added to the FMP. So the SSC was asked as part of development of that amendment to help the council think about the management unit for chub mackerel, and the SSC agreed that the ABC should apply to the whole East Coast, Maine through the East Coast of Florida. We do have limited information on the distribution and migration patterns of the stock, but it's a widely distributed species. So the SSC thought it made sense for the ABC to apply to the whole East Coast. But as part of development of that amendment, the council decided that none of the other management measures should apply to the South Atlantic. This was due to a combination of limited fisheries effort in that region and input from the state of Florida at the time that basically requested that the council not implement other management measures for the South Atlantic. So the council agreed that catch for the whole East Coast counts towards the ABC, but then everything else applies just Maine through North Carolina. And the way that the council made that work is there's a subtracted amount from the ABC to get to the ACL. And that the amount that is subtracted is intended to account for a buffer for South Atlantic catch. So then the ACL and everything below that is for Maine through North Carolina. The council also agreed to subtract a 4% management uncertainty buffer, which was not based on any sort of quantitative methodology. It was just deemed to be sufficient to prevent ACL overages when used in combination with the other management measures that were put in place. And that's how we get to the ACT. And then the council also agreed to subtract 6% from the ACT for expected dead discards to get to the total allowable landings limit of 4.5 million pounds. The council also implemented commercial possession limits that only come into effect after 90% and then 100% of that total allowable landings limit is projected to be landed. So these are basically in-season accountability measures. There's no possession limit until that threshold is reached. And then a 40,000 pound possession limit comes into effect at 90% of the TAL and 10,000 pounds at 100% of the TAL. So this slide shows how an estimate of total catch in the blue bars compares to the ACL and the ABC. Again, the same ACL and ABC have been in place since 2020. And you can see here that catch has been way below both the ABC and the ACL. And based on the estimates that went into this slide, the highest that catch has ever been is 12% of the ABC across this time period. And it's a similar story when it comes to the total allowable landings limit of 4.5 million pounds. Just waiting for the slide to advance. So that's the red horizontal line to the right, but this is showing a longer time series of landings. So you can see that peak year for the commercial fishery in 2013 when landings were about 5.25 million pounds. That's the only time that landings have exceeded the TAL, but again, that TAL was not in place in 2013. It first came into effect in 2020. You can see commercial landings kind of, increased around 2013, but have been very low since 2017. And then you can also see the recreational landings and the yellowish color that have been kind of on par with the commercial landings in recent years. So I'll walk through some summary information about the commercial fishery. This is all pretty similar to what I say every year, but just as a reminder, especially in terms of those years with the higher commercial landings, there's overlap with the Ilex squid fishery in terms of the vessels that were responsible for those landings and the time of year. And we heard from some captains during development of the Chub mackerel management measures initially that those years of those higher landings were years when those vessels, there wasn't squid around for them to target, but there was a lot of Chub mackerel, and there were some dealers that were willing to purchase Chub mackerel. So it was just kind of a bunch of factors all came together to make it worth targeting Chub mackerel, but they only really target them as kind of like an alternative or like a filler. I think they called it like a bailout species that they're typically prioritizing other species, but there were some years where it was worth targeting Chub mackerel. And just some kind of summary statistics about the commercial fishery over the most recent 5 years. Landings averaged about 82,000 pounds. We have discard information through CAMS, and the discard, it's a methodology that estimates discards the same way across all species, but for Chub mackerel, it does show pretty high variability in the discards with an average of 62,000 pounds over the past 5 years. The price per pound adjusted to $24 on average is 52 cents. Most of the commercial landings over the most recent 5 years came from bottom otter trawls, with a much smaller amount coming from gill nets and other gears. And most of the landings come from June through October. So we know this is like a warmer water species in our area. So it makes sense that they're mostly being caught in those warmer months. You've probably seen a few figures like this for some other species so far, but this is showing commercial landings by statistical area grouped into 5-year time blocks to help give you an idea of how the distribution of where landings are coming from, if it's changing or not over time. Maybe not the most useful way to look at it for chub mackerel because there's so much confidential data that's blurred out, but you can also see that across time, landings have come from as far north as the Gulf of Maine and as far south as North Carolina, and that most of the landings are generally coming from off of Delaware and Maryland, Virginia area. Next, to summarize some high-level information about the recreational fishery. This is showing MRIP estimates of harvest and discards in numbers of fish. Some of these estimates at the annual level do have high CVs, and you can see that in more recent years, there's been, 2018 on, there's higher catch than in prior years. And we do think a lot of that is due to improved reporting because the MRIP program has a core list of species that they train their shoreside intercept samplers on every year. And they added chub mackerel to that list at some point around 2015, 2016. So we think there's better reporting, and that's probably contributing to this pattern where there's higher catches in the more recent years compared to the earlier years. The council also sent out a small scombrid species ID guide to a number of permit holders and other partners in the region. Maybe that helped as well. You can see here that 2024 catch is lower than the recent few years, and it's been on a declining trend since a recent peak in 2022. We know that some other species also had lower MRIP estimates in 2024, and I think you've seen a few presentations by now talking about how 2024 had some colder water, especially earlier in the summer than prior years, so potentially that played into it. Some other high-level summary information about the recreational fishery over the most recent 5 years. About 47% of the catch was landed and 53% released. 62% of the harvest came from state waters, 38% from federal waters. Rhode Island accounted for most recreational harvest, followed by New York, then New Jersey. About 55% was estimated to come from the private rental mode, 30% party charter, and 15% from shore. And again, as with the commercial fishery, most of the harvest is coming from the warmer times of year, in this case, July through October. So we took all that information to the advisory panel and they wrote their typical fishery performance report. They reiterated some things that we've heard in the past, that chub mackerel is an opportunistic fishery, that only a few vessels can catch notable quantities because chub mackerel are fast and hard to catch. They also talked a lot about how there's been fluctuating availability in the mid-Atlantic. And again, that colder water in 2024 resulted in lower availability of chub mackerel. Advisors talked a little bit about the markets for chub mackerel and noted that they are used both for bait and food. They said they're a soft fish, so they can break down when they're used as bait. And they can be a higher quality when they're frozen, and the frozen product can be sold into food markets. One advisor also said that the level of commercial landings in recent years isn't really enough to support a food market and that we would need higher volumes for that. Noting that the recent annual landings are equivalent to just a few trailer loads, but that about 50 cents per pound is, not necessarily a bad price, and there's still some amount of revenue that can be made from that. This advisor, noted that the 5 million pound ABC that's been in place since 2020 does allow some amount of revenues for the fishery. This advisor thought the ABC should be higher. And advisors noted that higher catches allow for more fishery-dependent data collection, and this is a very data-poor species. And one advisor questioned if other forage amendment species should be managed similarly. So, as noted this morning, there's a 1,700 pound possession limit for a number of species under the forage amendment. So this advisor, suggested, is it worth considering allowing higher landings for some of these species to help generate more revenues? And advisors, none of the advisors suggested a need for any additional regulations for chub mackerel beyond what's currently in place. After the advisory panel meeting, one advisor provided more information on his for-hire catches of chub mackerel. So this advisor was a for-hire captain out of New Jersey, and he said that he does sometimes target chub mackerel, but he thinks he's one of the few for-hire boats in his area that targets them. Demand remains limited, but there are some customers who do want to target chub mackerel for personal consumption. And when they do that, they want to, catch a decent amount of them. This advisor noted that there was high availability of chub mackerel in the summers of 2022 and 2023, but delayed arrival in 2024. And part of the discussion at the AP meeting was about discard mortality rates and how we don't have studies to inform discard mortality rates. So this advisor, in response to that discussion, noted that, in his observations of catching chub mackerel on his for-hire boat, that he observes low release mortality because they're caught in the upper water column. They generally have short fight times, and they're caught with small hooks that are easily removed. This year we did something a little different, and we reached out to the summer flounder, scup, black sea bass, and bluefish APs to ask for their input on chub mackerel. This was just over email, especially because we have somewhat limited experience with chub mackerel on the mackerel, squid, butterfish FMP, especially from the recreational side of things. So we thought maybe reaching out to these other advisory panels would help us be able to get more information. So one of those other advisors noted that he has used chub mackerel for bait when longlining for swordfish in the past. Another advisor asked why the council has invested in a fishery management plan for the species when the landings are so low. And then another advisor provided some more detailed information on his experience with chub mackerel. So this advisor is a charter and commercial hook and line captain based on Long Island. And this advisor said that he does sometimes target chub mackerel on for-hire trips so that his clients can have something to catch. So this is, again, more of like a filler species when other potentially more desirable species aren't biting. Sometimes chub mackerel is around and gives the customer something to catch. He noted that they are sometimes kept for food, but they need to be bled right away and kept on ice. In terms of commercial hook and line harvest, this advisor said he can sometimes get about 90 cents to $1.20 a pound, which is a lot higher than the average price. But they're currently not abundant enough to really make it worth it for him to target them commercially. He noted that they are good bait for sharks, but there's less shark fishing nowadays than there used to be in the past. He also noted this 2024 cold water anomaly and different species, but he did say that he's seen an increase in small Atlantic mackerel in recent years. So hopefully that is a sign of good recruitment for that species. So we took all that information to the SSC and asked them to recommend ABCs for the next 3 years. And I'll turn it over to Paul Rago to summarize the SSC recommendation.
Okay, thank you, Julia. Yeah, basically, this is a data-limited stock, little biological information, no survey indices, and a highly variable catch history. It's been a model-resistant stock. None of the approaches tested to date have been successful. There are relatively few vessels that are capable of targeting the species in our region. As Julia mentioned, this was a bailout for squid fishermen when the peak occurred. But we also know that chub mackerel is very productive in other parts of the world. So the SSC felt that overfishing is unlikely for this species. There's insufficient evidence to suggest that we should modify the ABC for the period 2026 to 2028. Next slide, please. The ABC recommendation was 2,300 metric tons. We did recommend some interim metrics, and again, that would be following up and continuing the recreational landings, commercial landings, and incidence rate in the bottom trawl survey. I want to thank the center for providing that report. It was very, very helpful review of 60-year plus time series of chub mackerel presence. Next slide, please. Sources of uncertainty. There are many. We had to use the thesaurus to avoid redundancy in terms of saying we don't know a whole lot about this resource. It's absent in the spring survey and occasional in the fall. We really don't know much about its migratory patterns, although I think some of the the temperature-related observations will in fact start to inform that that understanding. And we don't know much about it in the life history or the stock structure in the Mid-Atlantic or on the East Coast, but there is information elsewhere. So there's a lot to be learned here. And as Julia mentioned, a lot of the recreational landings have increased, but this is possibly due to improved reporting and identifications. And most of the estimates have very high proportional standard errors. That is, they are uncertain, above 50%, and in general are suspect when you start to sum them up and quantify. Next slide, please. We have 2 slides on research recommendations. Apologize for the typo in the header there. One of the things that I think we've been very keen on is continuation of the cooperative industry, academic, and agency research programs. That's probably going to be the most effective way of improving our understanding of chub mackerel, given their relative absence in the survey. So they're oftentimes, you might think of them as the same category as oceanic squid that rarely appear in the survey area. We encourage increased fishery dependent information on age and size composition and directed effort. That's most likely only possible through some sort of cooperative program. There was some suggestions that we should try to synthesize all the various data sources. Some of the seasonal surveys from states, especially New Jersey and New York, can be informative about their local distribution and how that varies over time. And you could see that from the maps that Julia presented. And then finally, one more slide. There was a suggestion that it may be useful to compute a swept area abundance, recognizing completely that this is a very uncertain metric, but it might start to give an idea of what the densities could be in the area, and then make some assumptions about catchability and start to build an understanding of what's going on. The data limited methods, length-based models, and so forth have been tried, but we thought these types of models are continuously evolving, so there may be some value in that, particularly if there's some more biological data from the catches. Again, the long-term egg and larval data from the center, the Ecomon data, could be useful in terms of trying to get some basic understanding of where the populations are and what times of year they're spawning. And then finally, maybe a synthesis of the world literature about other stock assessments could help inform us and reduce the amount of equivocation that sort of defines our recommendations for continuing the existing catch limit on this resource. So that's all I have, and thank you very much for your time. Back to you, Julia.
Great, thank you. I just have a few more slides. So we took all that information. Well, we informed the monitoring committee over email that the SSC recommended a status quo ABC, and then we shared the advisory panel input with the monitoring committee, and the council staff recommendation was also for status quo. So we said, given all that, do you see any pressing need to have a monitoring committee meeting or recommend anything different from status quo? And the monitoring committee said, nope, they're good with status quo. They agreed to that over email. So we canceled our previously scheduled monitoring committee meeting just to try to be a little bit more efficient with things. So that takes us all to the decision point that the recommendation for you all to consider is status quo specifications for 2026 through 2028. Since this is technically setting new specifications, even though we're recommending that everything stay the same, it's not a review year. We're technically setting new specifications. So we do need a motion for that. And we have a draft motion available to adopt status quo specifications. But, first, obviously happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Questions or comments for Julia? Seeing none, I'm going to have some after we get the motion done. Somebody like to make the motion? Mike Luisi?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll move to adopt status quo Chub mackerel specifications for 2026 through 2028, including a 5.07 million pound ABC, 4.99 million pound ACL, 4.79 million pound ACT, and 4.50 million pound TAL.
We have a motion on the table and seconded by Jim Gilmore. Do we need any further discussion on the motion? Any rationale? Seeing none, is there any objection to the motion? Any abstentions to the motion? The motion passes by unanimous consent. Now, this hopefully won't take too long, but this is one of these items that, to me, on looking on the outside looking, well, I'll be looking on the outside looking in, I guess now. It's just one of these things that we could press out to a longer date, we could go at 8 years, maybe 10 years, 5 years, because with all the limited time and money and resources that we have for staff, for the Science Center, is this something that we could look to make it longer, or to see if all of a sudden now, we start reaching 3 million pounds, which we've only hit 3 million pounds once in the last 25 years. Is this something that the council might be interested in to make things easier? I mean, we can't do that today because we're going to have to do an amendment, I believe, to pass that, but there would be something that the council might be interested in looking into. Jim Gilmore?
From my opinion, yes. But the other option I was thinking as we went through this morning is like, can we ever do a swap? Can we take conch and whelk and start managing that and put this in the unmanaged species category? Because it seems to be we're harvesting less of these than we are of those, but we're not managing the former. So, and I guess that raises another question. Once you start managing something, can you stop managing it at some point?
Mike Penny?
I mean, yeah, in fact, that's something that I think, attendees to the council coordinating committee meeting, last month was something that headquarters is looking at, or different ways to streamline what we manage and how we manage it, potentially removing, setting up some criteria to remove stocks from management. And so there might be a path forward with that. I think one caution is that because the Mid-Atlantic Council has the unmanaged forage amendment, forage FMP, if you were to remove chub mackerel from management, would it revert to a forage species where there'd be a 1,700 pound possession limit instead of an unlimited possession limit? So in some respects, in terms of promoting or hopefully developing a commercial fishery, the current regs are much more liberal than they would be under the unmanaged forage amendment. So there may be a rationale there.
Michael Weezy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would also say to Jim, if we were to take on something like this and extend specifications for 8 years, 10 years, like as Wes said, in my opinion, that is kind of like not managing anymore. You're setting something for a long time. You're going to keep an eye on it and adjust as needed. And maybe that is a good path. for consideration for down the road, because you're kind of taking off, investing resources where they're needed. I think that'd be a good idea. Good idea, Wes.
Mike Penny.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag two other, not directly related to chub mackerel, but related to the squid mackerel butterfish regs that we've been looking at, and we're thinking about pursuing through the next sort of opportunistic rulemaking, which might be the chub mackerel specs. There's provision in the squid mackerel butterfish regs that require proposed rules be published for a 30-day comment period. It's the only FMP on the East Coast that has a specific requirement for a 30-day comment period. I think one of the reasons is the original FMP predated the Sustainable Fisheries Act, and the Sustainable Fisheries Act changed the Magnuson to say that we can have 15 to 60-day comment periods. And so for a lot of our specs packages, summer flounder, scup, sea bass, we often publish for a 15-day comment period because there's been so much vetting already. But with squid mackerel butterfish, we're required to do a 30-day. So we would like to remove that requirement and give ourselves some more flexibility to have potentially shorter comment periods when appropriate in order to get specs in place. The other one is that under both the butterfish and the Atlantic mackerel regs, we're required to publish by May 15th of each year an assessment of whether we've exceeded the ACL in the prior year, and just the timing, particularly of rec catch and the timing of data availability, it's almost impossible for us to make that date. And so we would like to, again, the other council's FMPs say, as soon as practicable or something like that, as terms of when we would make that announcement. So we're considering making that change as well, and providing ourselves a little bit more flexibility. But I just wanted to flag that for the council in case anybody had any concerns, objections, before we put it in a rule.
Any more comments? Seeing none, I would say probably when you review the specs next year, possibly you can talk with Garfo between, you'll have a year to talk, I guess, and hopefully figure out maybe something, if it's something even possible to do. Anything else, Julia? With that, thank you very much. Let's go to our 2026 Butterfish specifications. We will review the previously adopted 2026 specification for Butterfish and consider if any revisions are needed. Jason, whenever you're whenever you're ready.
Thank you. So as you said, it's just a review year. Give a little bit of background on the fishery, talk about the advisory panel's input, and then review where we are, potentially any changes for ABCs and management measures. So Butterfish was one of the earliest FMPs done by the council. It's currently a limited access fishery. It's about 258 permits on vessels. There's more in CPH, or confirmation of permit history. And there are no trip limits initially for those limited access vessels. There's a mesh requirement change that was in the recent proposed rule based on previous year's feedback from our advisory panel to add a little flexibility to their mesh requirements. And then incidental permits have a 600-pound trip limit. That was split off from Longfin. It used to be a combined Butterfish Longfin permit at one point that was split off back in a squid action. Key part of Butterfish is we've got a cap that controls discards in the Longfin squid fishery. Longfin squid fishery can be shut down if it exceeds its cap. That cap has been set at just under 4,000 metric tons for a number of years. There's been kind of preliminary discussions, should that be changed or not, but it's been working, hasn't interfered with the squid fishery for quite a while at that level. And then there's about almost another 2,000 metric tons set aside for discards in other fisheries, whether it's directed butterfish fishing or just other things. And then The directed fishing is slowed down with a kind of a series of trip limits once it starts to approach their quota, but we haven't gotten close to that recently. So these are the current 2025 and potentially previously adopted 2026 specifications for the council. I think I'll note here is, the stock was above its target, and so as it's kind of projected to go back towards its target, the OFL and ABC decline a bit, but the resulting quotas are still well above, a couple times or several times above any recent landings. Where do those ABCs come from? They come from the assessment. We have a statistical, quantitative, analytical assessment for this. It's the WAM model. The last update ingested data through 2023. So, for the duration of the years here, it's been above its target. We did get some updated indices through 2024. It's a data update from the center. Nothing particularly of note there. There's a lot of variability with butterfish. We saw more of that, and those indices are in the fishery information document or the center data update. We can dig into that if folks want, but it was just kind of more typical variability. This is from the last assessment, so it doesn't have 2024, but catch through 2023. And I think this is useful just to flag, it's discards are a substantial part of combined catch here. So it's really a commercial fishery, but we've got the landings in red and discards in blue there. So again, doesn't have 2024 the last year, but I think it's useful to highlight that discards are a substantial component of total catch. One of the things we provided the AP going into their fishery performance report meeting are just prices. These are standardized to $2024, so inflation adjusted. So, depending on exactly what year you start, maybe you see some trends or not. But 23 and 24 at least were pretty similar. So we've got landings, we've got prices, so you can calculate revenues. And so again, 23 and 24, pretty similar to each other. And this fishery has kind of started in some fits and starts. The market is not real strong for butterfish in some years, or butterfish are not always available in some years, so you kind of get a lot of variability year to year. Where have those landings come in at least in 2024? Majority going into Rhode Island, kind of a mix of other states. These are the statistical areas, but this year we have kind of, I think, a more informative way to describe this. Tori generated some maps for us. So the map in the bottom right is just 2024. All of the others are series of 5-year blocks. I think pretty consistent, the areas where we see butterfish landings come out of really through the whole time series and including 2024. So again, we kind of give kind of a similar primer to the AP and to get their perspective for all the subsequent discussions, whether it's the Scientific and Statistical Committee, the Monitoring Committee, or the Council. So in terms of landings, the things that they flagged to us is that the 2024 market was pretty similar to 2023. They continue to flag that Northeast Canyons Monument has reduced butterfish landings when it's been in effect, whether that's either because like a fence effect that folks would have to travel far beyond it, or to access areas that may be impractical because of weather or fuel costs. And then also there have been times through history of the fishery where they may be out east and then kind of stop in that area for butterfish on the way back. So this wouldn't have applied to 2024, but Seafreeze did note that in 2025, early 2025, they'd flagged some vessels that to hold off on butterfish just because they weren't quite sure what tariffs were going to mean for butterfish. So that's like the advisory panel's input on kind of landings the last couple of years. General things that they flagged, they had no specific recommendations for changes. There's some concern that the way that discards are kind of set aside, may be a bit overly precautionary, and that may well be true. But the way it's set aside, it's unlikely to disrupt the longfin squid fishery or insufficiently set aside discards and get into some kind of ACL overage situation. And they continue to voice uncertainty about, what the biomass estimates are, what the proxy reference point that we're using is a lot lower than what directly comes out of the assessment. The SSC is kind of deemed that to be unrealistically high, so what's used is a good bit lower. And they've kind of noted, certainly even just the time that I've been at the council, the perspective of butterfish's stock status has changed substantially between at least this assessment versus this assessment model versus the previous one. So the current ABCs, again, the 2026 ABC, a bit lower. It's based on the council's P-star risk policy, backs off of the OFL catch just a little bit to have a lower chance of overfishing or a higher chance of not overfishing. The SSC is deemed this to be a fairly high uncertainty, which is 150% CV. The kind of uncertainty spread that they put on the estimate in order to figure out how much they have to back off from the overfishing level to achieve that slightly lower chance of overfishing. And again, it's a proxy for that overfishing reference point based on what we think 2/3 of the estimated natural mortality is. So 2/3 times that estimated mortality gives you an F of 0.85, which again is quite a bit lower than the model generated F. So staff kind of looked at all the information. We didn't have new information. We currently scheduled for 2026 for the next assessment. The landings and the survey kind of fluctuating fairly typically, and the AP didn't flag anything major. So that went to the SSC, and the SSC also recommended just maintaining the plan 2026 ABC. It flagged, it's not overfished, overfishing is not occurring. Now there is some maybe a good bit of uncertainty about the scale of the population because that depends on what we think the habitat is, but that could go either way, and we think there's a significant fraction of the resource that's offshore, unsurveyed, and so that that would be somewhat protective of the stock, and generally a perceived favorable status of the population, and the commercial fishery seems well monitored. This was just kind of excerpted from the SSC summary. Paul, did you have anything you wanted to add on the SSC findings for butterfish?
No, I think you've captured it well. Thank you.
Thanks. So it was the same meeting that Julia mentioned was canceled, the monitoring committee. We chatted over email, given the SSC's findings and fishery performance. It didn't appear that any changes were warranted at this time. So no action is needed by the council right now if you also conclude no changes that are warranted. Future, we have an assessment plan for 2026 to set 27 and 8 specifications. It's a bit of a question mark whether that occurs with the whole kind of triaging assessment resources. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Questions, comments for Jason? Robert Rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to refresh my memory, Jason, we haven't had an issue with the closure of the Lalago fishery because of the butterfish cap under the most current assessment, correct?
I think we had one trimester 1 closure at one point, and it actually wouldn't have happened but for some data delays. That may have been under the current assessment model. Again, since we're kind of getting assessments, we have been getting every 2 years. But other than that one closure, yeah, we haven't had other closures.
Anything else for Jason? Since we don't have to have any action, Jason, that concludes your butterfish presentation. And while you're sitting right there, Let's go with the 2026 Longfin Squid specifications. We're also going to review the previously adopted 2026 specifications for Longfin Squid. Jason, whenever you're ready.
Thank you. We'll have that up in a minute. It'll be kind of a similar similar presentation where overview, we're in a review year and no changes from the SSC, but we'll also kind of go through and kind of a similar background, AP input, and then talk about the ABC. So again, Squid, another one of our early FMPs, limited access with really most of the landings are coming in on a tier 1 set of permits. There's about 230 of those that are on vessels currently, also a number of permits and confirmation of permit history on the shelf. There are some gear requirements, minimum mesh sizes that vary by trimester. The trimesters are 3-4 month periods, just kind of sequencing through the calendar year. And there's a 5,000 pound trip limit for tier 2 and a 2,500 pound for tier 3. Those tiers were set up in a council action, I was going to say a few years ago, maybe a decade ago, but and there's a 250 pound for incidental permits. It's still open access. And again, there's about 400 total Longfin kind of moratorium permit rights in the system. About 100 of them, a mix of those different tiers, are in that CPH, confirmation of permit history, or on the shelf. So the quota is initially divided up by the trimesters, 43%, 17%, 40%. There are rollover provisions. So up to for trimester 2, it can go up by 1.5 times its initial amount. Then there's full rollover into trimester 3. So any underages or overages from T1 and T2 are kind of just basically rolled into trimester 3, and then just fish on the full quota in trimester 3. Trimester 1 and 3, if it closes, is a 2,500 pound incidental trip limit. It used to be that way for trimester 2, but in 2016, there was a good amount of directed fishing under that 2,500 pound trip limit, and the council changed that to 250 pounds to try to fully shut that fishery down when it closes in trimester 2 to avoid trimester 2 overages. So these are the specs for 4, 5, and 6, just static specifications for those years. The ABC came from the previous assessment, basically concluded that things look lightly fished. Looking at an exploitation ratio of catch over estimated biomass, that at that time was 23,400. If you were to kind of dig through the current assessment, that value is no longer 23,400. It's a bit more. But while we've had an assessment ongoing, and it just kind of left things alone, despite that change in that data point. So I've kind of scanned through some of the assessments. There's been kind of changes in perspectives, whether stock status is good or bad. And I think this is kind of partly due to the inherent variability of squid. But since 2010, we've been looking at swept area biomass trends. There's a figure, and the conclusion was that it's been well above its target in almost all the years, and not over exploited. We did get updated indices from Bigelow and NEMAP, kind of similar to Butterfish, just typical variability as we've seen in previous years. So recent performance, this is just from the last assessment, and I think it's useful to highlight kind of that early foreign fishery back in the 70s that was phased out over time, and the fishery domesticated, the U.S. fishery kind of taking over, and is there a trend there? Not. Again, it depends on just when you start and when you end. The one thing I will flag, so prior to 2000, there weren't in-season quotas. We have had either mostly trimesters or maybe quarters for a year or two in there as well. So a lot of the years we haven't exceeded the annual quota or haven't reached it to close the fishery, but we have had some in-season closures that have limited the fishery to what would have occurred if those seasonal closures had not occurred. Prices for Longfin took a big hit with COVID. Seemed to stabilize from 24 from 23. But up till COVID, there was a pretty strong upward trend, even in adjusting for inflation, but definitely took a hit with COVID. So landings and revenues, it's just, again, there's that combination of prices and landings to get the revenues, which are the dashed line there. And again, those are standardized to $2024. Landings details for 2024, the majority going into Rhode Island. And those are the stat areas that are not confidential. But again, Tori created some neat maps for us that I think kind of give a better sense of, where the fishery was in 2020, where the fish were coming out of in 2024. And, I mean, at least to my eye, big picture wise, not a ton of change over time, or 2024 being particularly unusual. For Butterfish, the service doesn't publish weekly landings because industry kind of got jammed up one year by potential export interests, like looking at how fast landings were coming in and knowing they had like a lot of butterfish in stock, and we're jamming them up on prices. So so NIMS doesn't publish the weekly quota reports because of that. But so I didn't show you this for Butterfish because we don't, NIMS doesn't publish it. And that was just kind of a, back in the day, it was just kind of a neat cooperative thing. Like, it was just industry flagged it as an issue and they kind of just fixed it. So not as an issue for Longfin, but this gives you a sense of how Longfin landings come in over the course of a year. And the seasonality can really vary. If you look at a broader, I can't remember if I have this one, and I might not have this one in there or not, but it's in the fishery information document. Sometimes trimester 1 is a dominant trimester, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. There's a lot of variability with this fishery. This is 2025 trimester 1, caught about twice as much squid as trimester 1 2024, but again, really, it's almost like I feel like I'd start to get worried if things were actually the same, because it's almost always not with squid. So AP fishery performance report, again, industry's perspective on what's going on. And we didn't have a huge turnout on our AP, but a good group of core folks who have a lot of knowledge of the fishery. I think when things aren't changing a whole lot, I think a lot of the fishermen have to make a hard trade-off of whether to fish or attend a meeting. And I think in years when there's not a lot going on, we have a lower participation, but again, a good core group. So they flagged, we haven't had recovery, but some stabilization with prices, similar market 24 to 23. They flagged that their sense was cold bottom temperatures really delayed the start of the 2024 summer season, but kind of late summer into the fall was good. And they continue to flag that there are a lot of area-based or gear restrictions that kind of limit their ability to do what they would do if they were not so constrained, and that likely reduces landings compared to what would happen if not for those, whether it's SCUP GRAs or through the commission. There's some like lobster, mobile gear separation things. There's a lot of area-based restrictions on them. General, they kind of asked the council to keep on top of access issues. And especially, I mean, it's wind has been a concern. They flagged that they're proceeding successfully along with MSC recertification. Council staff participates in a lot of those certifications and recertifications with the MSC folks, just like figuring out how to get information. And their recommendation was to kind of just continue to keep things status quo, especially since there's a research track ongoing that has a lot of research trying to figure out, why are squid productive sometimes, others not, and There's a lot of industry collaboration in that research track. So we've been at 23,400 metric ton ABC since 2012. I already flagged where that came from. Again, there's not a lot of trend in the biomass estimates, and a stability of instability of catches in recent years, maybe a better way to say it. So staff recommended status quo, similar stories, butterfish. We don't have a new assessment, continued landings and survey indices fluctuations, and nothing major identified by the AP. The SSE concurred. They recommended maintaining the planned 2026 ABC. They flagged that things have been relatively stable, at least in terms of no major trends. They also kind of are well aware and are somewhat integrated into the ongoing research track assessment. And it kind of noted that there's a lot of collaboration with scientists in and out of NIMS and industry managers, hoping to kind of improve our understanding to kind of optimize utilization of the resource. Anything else you want to flag, Paul, from SSE perspective?
No, thank you. Thanks, Jason. I do think it's useful to highlight or emphasize again the bullet point there that this is an excellent model for stock assessments, and it does have a pretty much a full integration of all components of industry. It has the oceanographers, it has the the cooperative research partners, and so it's really a good example of what the potential is for stock assessment. So thank you.
Thanks, Paul. So given the feedback from the AP and the SSC's findings, again, like Butterfish, the monitoring committee didn't see anything that warranted changes, and so we canceled our meeting and are not recommending any changes. And no action is needed by the council if you concur. And then we should have new information coming out of the ongoing assessment to facilitate setting specs for 2027 and beyond. Thanks.
Thank you, Jason. Questions, comments for Jason? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Jason. Before we get into the Surfclam and ocean quahog, let's take a little bit of a break. We'll come back at 2:45.
Hey, Steven, can you let me know if you can hear me okay?
Yep, sound good, Jess.
Great, thank you.
Do you want me to run your slides?
I think it'd be fine if it's fine if I do that because I have the motion at the end for the last slide. So I can type that.
Okay, no worries.
And then copy it over. So, but you have it as a backup. We run into hiccups. So thanks.
Howdy. Hey, Jared. What's up? Testify House Committee. Yeah, I saw it. I talked to him last night, actually. Justin's house. Yeah. Yeah, he called me about the stuff. So, yeah. Yeah, I saw the video. He did a good job. Yeah.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's get started with our next agenda item, the 2026 Atlantic Surfclam and Ocean Quahog specification. As part of the 2021-2026 multi-year specification process for Atlantic Surfclam and Ocean Quahog, the council will review the most recent information available to determine whether modifications of the 2026 specifications is warranted. Jessica, whenever you are ready.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Chair. So today, okay, if I can advance the slide, there we go. So today, I'm going to touch on a few pieces of information to support your review of 2026 measures for Surfclam and Ocean Quahog. I'm first going to provide some highlights from the fishery information document, review the advisory panel developed fishery performance report, mainly the critical issues that our advisors highlighted for the council. I'll review the Surfclam staff recommendations as well as the SSC recommendations for Surfclam, and then we can pause for questions, and I'll do the same thing for Ocean Quahog. In terms of information to support this review, Dan Hennon from the Northeast Fisheries Science Center prepared commercial data updates for both Surfclam and Ocean Quahog. So this included full year data through 2024, although I'll note that that data is incomplete and preliminary. When we get it, it usually gets revised a little bit. Our last management track assessments occurred for Ocean Quahog back in 2020. So we've been receiving data updates since then. And then for Surfclam, you received one last year in 2024. So tentatively, we're scheduled to get an Ocean Quahog management track assessment in 2026 and a Surfclam management track assessment in 2028. But I say tentative because a lot of things are in flux right now in terms of capacity and resources. So we'll let you know more when we hear more. So for Surfclam, based on that 2024 management track assessment that included data through 2023, Surfclam was not overfished because the biomass levels are above the threshold. And then overfishing was not occurring because the exploitation rate is below the threshold rate. However, I'll note, as you can see on the left-hand side, the biomass target dropped below the biomass dropped below the target level in 2023, and it was 95% of the SSB MSY target. As part of that update, we also received more detailed information on landings. As many of you know, we transitioned to the CAMS landing system. So total CAMS landings on the graph are the dotted red line. That includes state water landings as well. So for the EEZ, which is our management unit, that's the solid black line on the graph. That's the landing time series going back to the 1960s to the most recent information we have for 2024. The quota, which is the dotted line on the graph, was a little hard to see. So at least for the most recent years, I plotted that green line on the graphic so you could see where the landings were relative to the quota. So landings really have been declining since the mid-2000s and are substantially lower than the quota levels right now. They're about 30% of the quota levels. Landings by area, breaking this out over time. So Southern Virginia is purple and Delmarva is blue. You see early in the time series, it was those areas were higher contributors to landings. Those have declined over time, as has that teal New Jersey contribution that also has been declining over time. And then in more recent years, you see the green Long Island, yellow Southern New England, and black Georges Bank increasing as the fishery has been prosecuted in those more northern areas. Landings per unit effort is a measure of the efficiency with which bushels of clams are being landed. So the units on the left-hand side are bushels per hour. You'll see a dotted line there at 50 bushels per hour, which in times past, industry members had indicated that that was a metric that they had considered. There's a plot for each of these areas in all of the different colors, but the solid black line is the total landings per unit effort over time. So that shows that the fishery over time has been less efficient in terms of the numbers of bushels per hour they've been able to produce. And this metric is separate from market conditions or prices or other sort of economic metrics that might be at play. It's just a metric of how efficient you are in terms of landing a bushel of clams. The Garfo regional office maintains a quota monitoring site, and I went ahead and pulled some of the more recent information for 2025 for comparison today. This is Surfclam landings through May 21st. The blue line is the 2025 current year landings. You can see those landings are about on track with where we were in 2024, which is the gold dotted line on the graph. The solid black line is the quota rationing trajectory. So if the landings were taken at a steady equal rate throughout the fishing year, that's where that landings line would fall. But the landings are on track to be, again, substantially lower than the quota, that 3.4 million bushels for the fishing year. In 2024, there were 57 vessels in both the Surfclam and Ocean Quahog fishery. So this is vessels landing Surfclams only, Ocean Quahogs only, or vessels landing both. Both species, this is down 3 vessels from 2023, and there were 15 dealers of Surfclam and Ocean Quahog that again landed either one or both species in 2024. I'll note in the past, we've presented the information in terms of companies, but you'll notice in the fishery information documents that we've presented the information a little bit differently this year because we are running into issues with confidentiality in the fishery as it's continued to consolidate. It's been more difficult for us to present information the way we've done in the past. So this is presented as 15 dealers of Surfclam and Ocean Quahog, unique dealers. The Surfclam ex-vessel value in 2024 was 23 million, and that's less than the Fred inflation adjusted value of $40 million ex-vessel revenue that we saw in 2017. So the fisheries performance report that our advisors prepared on April 30th included a number of critical issues that they felt were important to highlight for the council. So I'm going to touch on those. But I also wanted to note in that report, our advisors again indicated they'd like to see status quo quotas for the fishery in 2026, because this leads to quota stability and fishery market stability going forward. So one of the concerns that our advisors raised were imports of Ocean Quahog meat coming into the US from Canada. This is the exact same species, Arctica islandica, that is being landed in the US. It's coming in, their prices are cheaper, and Canada has an overabundance of that resource. The advisors noted that the fishery has an unlimited bycatch for greenling cockles and propeller clams, and I went on their website and noted that they are also being landed as part of that fishery. And they wanted to note that these market conditions is just one more thing that's exerting additional pressure on them in the marketplace. Advisors also noted they're concerned about these Georges Bank biotoxin closures. The regulations for shellfish safety are being updated by the Food and Drug Administration and NOAA Seafood Inspection. You'll recall that our council has sent letters and had some discussion at prior council meetings about this in the past. NOAA Fisheries has not opened areas on Georges Bank that are in these paralytic shellfish poisoning closure areas because they're awaiting those program changes. And the industry's indicated they're very frustrated with the pace of work for FDA and NOAA Seafood Inspection to make this happen. In addition, advisors highlighted again the co-occurrence of Surfclam and Ocean Quahog as a concern. And that's something that the council had worked to address with the species separation requirements amendment that we submitted to NIMS for the initial submission in April. Advisors indicated that they felt it was really important for the council to support research in the Great South Channel Habitat Management Area. That's that Nantucket Shoals, Southern New England area that has clam access areas within the habitat area that New England Fishery Management Council has developed. They'd like to see the utility of those closures in clam fishing access areas be reevaluated. Along those lines, they also felt that there needed to be stronger requirements to review essential fish habitat designations and any associated management measures, such as gear restricted areas that are in place for these fisheries. The advisors continue to have concerns about access to fishing grounds, wind energy, aquaculture areas, protected areas, historic monuments, and other offshore ocean users have become an even more critical issue for the clam fishing industry in terms of finding access to clam beds. So they've again highlighted that was in the prior fishery performance report. And they also noted they're concerned about wind energy development, but they did highlight that some of their recent communications with BOEM, the developers, and the state regulators are really improving relative to what they had indicated previously. There still are concerns about potential impacts on fishing operations, as well as impacts to how the surveys are going to be handled and how those impacts are going to be mitigated. The advisors also indicated that they'd like to see the Surfclam and Ocean Quahog Advisory Panel be convened jointly with fishery management action teams for any issues related to these fisheries when those activities are convened. So there's a lot more detail in that fishery performance report. It's in your meeting materials. So I'm going to shift gears to the annual catch limits and annual catch targets. So for Atlantic surf clam, there's a single overfishing limit and acceptable biological catch that's set by the SSC. And then the council, as prescribed in the FMP, has generally set the annual catch limit equal to that ABC, and then set a single annual catch target for this fishery. So based on the information that was available to the staff, we recommended no changes to management measures for surf clam. This is a review of measures. So we, in the last year, actually in our review cycle, because this is 2026, and we had set measures for 2021 to 2026. So status quo quotas, 26,218 metric tons. The staff also recommended continued suspension of the minimum shell length standard for the fishery for 2026. This is a regulation that has to be reviewed annually based on updated information. Based on an analysis conducted by NOAA Fisheries GARFO, 8.4% of the coastwide surf clam landings to date in 2024 were undersized. That 95% upper confidence limit was 9.8%. That's really well below the 30% threshold at which the regional administrator cannot suspend that shell length requirement. So staff is recommending that for this year that it be suspended. GARFO will undergo a process to do a reanalysis of the information through July 2025 before they do their rulemaking. So they have the most up-to-date information on which to make that decision. So we presented all of this information to the SSC in May, and that information is in, more detailed information is in the SSC's report to the council. The SSC, based off of that 2024 management track recommendation, had developed OFLs and ABCs for the council for 2025 through 2028. So the SSC developed those based on a modified OFL probability distribution, and it was their tier 1 category with a coefficient of variation of 100%. So that was the basis for their recommendations for those 4 years of measures. So the SSC expressed concern at this May meeting about continuing declines in stock biomass and landings per unit effort. They noted that stock biomass remains above 1/2 BMSY. It's just slightly below that BMSY target at 95%. And the fishing mortality remains low. So they also had concerns that since 2020, the number of port samples for surf clams has actually declined by over 90%. So that's definitely concerning, and that's providing less information to address a lot of issues, especially since for surf clams, it's a length-based assessment. So collecting that biological information beyond the survey is really important. They did note, though, that none of these signals judged sufficient to adjust their previously recommended ABC for 2026. So their previous recommendation was 43,372 metric tons. Last year, when we got the management track assessment, we got those 2025 and 2026 revised numbers, and the council stayed status quo on the ACLs, ACTs, and the commercial quotas you previously recommended. So the plan going forward, if there's no changes today, would be to take those 27 and 2028 recommendations next year, and the council can develop future specifications for surf clam, along with additional information we may get on ocean quahog, to set measures for both species going forward. Okay, well, Mr. Chair, that is all I have for surf clam, if there's any questions.
Any questions for Jessica? I see no hands, Jessica.
Okay, I'll just keep rolling then. All right, for ocean quahog, as I noted, the last management track was 2020, so the data we have for stock status is through 2019. And based on that information, the stock is not overfished because it's above the target level for spawning stock biomass. And overfishing is not occurring because it's below the exploitation rate fishing mortality threshold. Total landings for ocean quahog through 2024, because there isn't a state fishery, that total CAMS landings information is all of the landings, because this is an offshore fishery. So the number, we don't have that variation with the state data in there. The black dotted line is the quota. So from about 2000, you can see that the total landings for ocean quahog have been declining over time. And at this point, they're substantially lower than the commercial quota for this fishery. They're also about 30% of the quota. Breaking the information out by area, Southern Virginia and Delmarva are in that blue, and very few, if any, landings are coming from those areas anymore. Lesser amounts coming from New Jersey. Most of the landings in the fishery are now coming from Long Island, Southern New England, and some landings from the Georges Bank area. Looking at the landings per unit effort, we see a much flatter total landings per unit effort for this fishery. That's the black solid line. Although by area, you do see spikes in terms of the landings per unit effort as the fishery has moved into certain areas and fished, and then those landings per unit effort rates have come down. Recently, more of the activity is happening in those more northern areas, and you can see that purple line sort of bounce around more recently for Georges Bank, as well as that blue line increasing for Southern New England. Recent landings from Garfo with the data through May 21. The 2025 ocean quahog landings are in that dark blue, and they're about on par with the 2024 landings, which are that golden dotted line. And again, that quota rationing trajectory, if landings were taken at a steady rate throughout the fishing year, those lines should fall on that solid line, but they're substantially lower. So similar to Surfclam, 57 total vessels in the combined Surfclam and Ocean Quahog fleet, 15 dealers. The Ocean Quahog non-main ex-vessel value was about $17 million in 2024. This is less than the Fred inflation adjusted $32 million of ex-vessel value we saw in 2018. The Ocean Quahog, I'm sorry, that should say main fishery. In 2024, there were 8,577 main bushels out of the 100,000 bushel main bushel allocation to that fishery. That's the main mahogany quahog fishery. They're allocated 100,000 main bushels, which are a different size bushel than the regular bushel measurements. And they can also, if in the past, have leased ITQ from ITQ holders. So landings in that area have been over 100,000 bushels before. However, this fishery has been declining over time. So right now we're just reporting landings for this fishery. So for Ocean Quahog, top part of the flow chart is very similar, setting an OFL and an ABC, working with the SSC. The council has generally set that annual catch limit equal to the ABC. But because of the two fisheries, the main fishery and the non-main fishery, an annual catch target is set for that non-main ITQ fishery. And then an annual catch target of that 100,000 bushels is set for the main fishery. So the SSC, when they developed their recommendations in 2020 for this fishery, they followed a very similar approach to what they did for Surfclam. We ended up with a modified overfishing limit probability distribution with a CV of 100% based on that management track assessment. The SSC during their review this year noted that the most recent stock assessment suggested only a slight decline in long-term biomass. They noted that completion of the 2025 survey on Georges Bank for Ocean Quahog was critical, as that area had not been surveyed since 2016. So we do have some concerns about what kind of information we might be getting going forward in these fisheries. But they indicated they really had no compelling reasons to deviate from the previously recommended ABC for 2026. And likewise, staff's recommendations were also for no changes to measures for this fishery. So the previous recommendations through the time series for Ocean Quahog are given here. So we'd be looking at that last year of measures with that ABC 43,948 metric tons, and then a combined main, non-main quahog fishery at 24,689 metric tons for the quota. Oh, that's where I put my staff recommendation slide. Sorry, I already said that. All right, if there's any questions, I'll take those.
I got a quick question. What's the difference in a bushel? A bushel is a unit of measurement. How's it different?
It's volumetrically, those main bushels are slightly different. I don't remember exactly by how much off the top of my head, but it's a different formula, and that's something I can follow up with Doug Potts to refresh my memory on how much of a difference there is between the two.
Okay, I was just curious.
Yeah, we used to have the same issue actually when I worked with oysters, because like they had different bushel measurements in Virginia and Maryland at one point. When you go through the historical data, there was a Maryland bushel, there was a Virginia bushel. It made it very, very confusing.
Maury?
Well, just to add to that, the Surfclam bushel is different than a standard bushel as well.
Okay. Peter Hughes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. Jess, do we need a motion to maintain the 2026 measures? Or was that an update?
So to maintain most of the measures, you do not. The only motion the council would need is to modify or to recommend that the shell length requirement be maintained. And I do have a draft for the council or council members when they're ready for that.
Okay, yeah. When we're ready for that, I'm happy to make those motions. Also, we need to suspend the size limit, I believe.
Yep, that is what we will need to do. Any more questions or comments for Jessica? Seeing none. Jessica, I think you have a motion ready to go up. Peter Hughes, would you like to make this?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to make that. Move to request the regional administrator suspend the Atlantic Surfclam minimum size limits for 2026.
We have a motion on the table by Peter Hughes and seconded by Sonny Gwynn. Do we have any further discussion on the motion?
I do not. It's something we do on an annual basis.
Yep. Are there any objection to the motion? Any abstentions to the motion? One abstention. Motion passes by consent. Jessica, do you have anything else for us today?
I do not. That's it for surf clams and ocean quahogs.
For once, you didn't have to be fast and you were fast anyway. We got you in that habit.
There, you guys have me conditioned. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, let's move on to our next agenda item. We're quite a bit ahead of the schedule, which is good. We're going to go to gear marking on-demand gear framework. The council will receive an update from the PDT FMAT on the development of the joint New England and Mid-Atlantic Council Omnibus Alternative Gear Marking Framework Adjustment. This action will consider revisions of gear marking regulations to allow the use of fixed gear without a persistent buoy line in fixed gear fisheries in the greater Atlantic region. And we're going to have Caroline Potter online, but also Mike Penton, you would like to start us off?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the council for letting us give this update on the framework adjustment. As we talked about in April, the expectation / hope is that the council will feel prepared to adopt this framework adjustment in October, I believe. But Caroline's going to go through the proposed timeline. I just wanted to remind everybody basically why we're doing this, because I know it's confusing, and some of the slides that Caroline is are going to go through, they're technical, and the bottom line, for just to remind everybody, is the take reduction plan, the Atlantic large whale take reduction plan regulations implemented to reduce and mitigate potential impacts of fixed gear fisheries on North Atlantic right whales primarily. In 2021, it changed the gear restricted areas from being, from fixed gear being prohibited in those areas and times to allowing on-demand gear to be used. So as long as you were fishing without persistent buoy lines, under the take reduction plan, lobstermen primarily could fish in these areas. But under the groundfish and some other regulations subject to the Mid-Atlantic and New England councils, they're not allowed to use to fish without persistent buoy lines. So we ended up with this conflict where, the lobstermen theoretically had the opportunity to switch to on-demand gear and fish in these areas, except we had these other regs that were prohibiting it. And so what we're trying to do with this action is clean that up and provide the opportunity for lobstermen primarily and others that want to be able to use on-demand gear as a way to fish in these areas where they'd otherwise be restricted due to concern about right whales, and be able to fish without being subject or prohibited from the other regulations. And so it's the gear marking regulations under the councils that are prohibiting vessels from taking advantage of these opportunities. So just kind of set the stage there, and then Caroline is going to go through the presentation, and then we'll take any questions.
And also we have on council staff, Hayden is here as well. So Caroline, whenever you are ready.
All right, thanks for setting the stage, Mike. So yes, I am one of the co-leads for this action, and also Allie Murphy is the other co-lead for this action, and she's on the line as well. So first, I will give you a bit of a refresher on the action, and then I'll give you an update on what the PDT FMAT has accomplished since your last meeting. So kind of as a reminder, a bit of what Mike just covered, but the proposed management change for this framework adjustment is to provide alternative surface marking provisions for fixed gear fisheries in the Greater Atlantic region to just allow the use of fixed gear without a persistent buoy line, and in so doing, right, reconcile those regulations and the potential future changes to the Marine Mammal Protection Act regulations. So essentially, the aim of the action is to provide fishermen more fishing opportunities by allowing them to fish with gear that doesn't meet current gear marking regulations, and that encompasses on-demand gear. All right, so in order to allow gear marking alternatives, Mid-Atlantic, New England FMPs need to be changed. Gear marking is not in the Interstate Fishery Management Plan for lobster, though, so an addendum to the lobster FMP is not required. The intention is to use the resulting rulemaking from this joint action to also change the gear marking regulations for lobster. And this is so there will be consistency among fixed gear fisheries in their gear marking regulations in the Greater Atlantic region. So our intention with the joint council action process that's being used is simply to comply with all statutory requirements and to be efficient with how rulemaking would be conducted in order to achieve that consistency for all the fixed gear fisheries. So even though an addendum to the lobster plan is not required, we're inviting feedback from the commission, its lobster boards, the various states, and lobster industry. All right, so timing. Since you initiated the framework, the New England Council also initiated the framework, and the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission's Lobster Board received an update. The PDT FMAT has met twice more, and we had our fourth meeting on May 20. Going forward, we will present an update to the New England Council on June 26th, and we will provide an update to the Commission in August. And we are still on track for you and the New England Council to be able to take final action in the fall. All right, so this is a lot of text, but you've seen most of it. As a reminder, the intention with this first set is to provide optional surface marking provisions for the fixed gear fisheries in the region, just so fishermen can fish in areas where they currently can't because of those regulations that we've been talking about. So for this set, we have 4 alternatives, and we added alternative 1D since you last saw these. So alternative 1A is no action. Alternative 1B would allow alternative gear marking in the entirety of the Greater Atlantic region. Now, this doesn't mean that every gear marking alternative would be approved for use in the entire region. So in other words, it wouldn't be required that alternatives be approved for the entire region. So it is still possible that under 1B, there could be restrictions on where alternatives are approved for use. And this is just partly because some systems may be more appropriate for certain areas, whether that be inshore versus offshore, or in areas with high fishing density versus low density. Alternative 1C would limit the use of gear marking alternatives to Atlantic large whale take reduction plan seasonal restricted areas, and only when those closures are in place. So it is seasonally and temporally restricted. And the new one here is alternative 1D. This would allow alternative gear marking to those seasonal closures, but would allow it all year. So even when the closures are not in place, so just spatially restricted. No major changes with alternative set 2, but based on feedback from April council meetings, we did tweak the purpose and need. As a reminder, this set is intended to promote the accuracy of alternative gear marking location information. And there are just 2 alternatives here. 2A is no action, and 2B would require a person to demonstrate knowledge of an approved gear marking alternative, which could take varying forms, as we discussed last time, but essentially this would be creating a requirement to complete some sort of educational component before being able to use a gear marking alternative. All right, so the regional administrator would approve gear marking alternatives based on their functional equivalence to current surface markings. Because of that, the PDT FMAT has been working on creating a list of definitional elements for a functional equivalent. And this is because we want to ensure that alternative gear markings will perform the same essential functions as current markings. The PDT FMAT in developing these elements has been trying to provide enough description for each element to the point at which a desired outcome is achieved, but without being so descriptive that flexibility is lost. And this is because we want these elements to be evergreen. We don't want new technological developments in on-demand fishing gear, for example, to make these elements seem outdated or incredibly restrictive. So let's run through these. First, detectability. Pretty straightforward. We mark gear so people know that it's there. Retrievability. Gear needs to have an identified means of retrieval. And with retrievability, a couple PDT FMAT members have raised concerns with gear being used that was designed to only be retrieved by grappling. So that's been highlighted. Identification is having gear be marked with identifying information, and there are kind of 2 components with this. So the first is that some fisheries require surface markings to have owner, vessel, permit information, etc. So this would replicate the current requirements for each fishery. And then the second kind of component of this is that some have strongly recommended a unique identifier be associated with each gear marking alternative unit. Enforceability is ensuring that enforcement is able to locate, retrieve, and redeploy gear. Now, all of these elements so far, the PDT FMAT has described as essential. And then the next 3, the team has characterized as very beneficial, but not necessarily critical in all circumstances. So Viewing distance. This is to ensure that gear can be detected from a similar minimum distance as current surface markings. The team did not think that it was appropriate for it to set an exact blanket minimum viewing distance at this time, but we've noted that it is important that approved gear marking alternatives are viewable from similar distances as they currently are. Set direction is having the gear's set direction be identifiable, and currently with on-demand trials and research, set direction is actually pretty clear. On current map displays, there is a line depicting the location of a trap trawl or gill net string, which is more clear than traditional markings. Timing, there are a couple concepts when it comes to timing. So the first is the amount of time that passes when gear is deployed to when that gear is first detectable by others. And then the second is how up-to-date gear location information is. So for example, if you have shared gear location info and then a storm shifts the gear on the bottom, when would that location information be updated to reflect the shift in location? And then lastly, when gear is removed from the water, gear markings should also be removed. So kind of three concepts with timing. Okay. We wanted to provide some preliminary impacts for this action, and this is just a very high-level summary that I'll go through here. But first, for fishery resources, the alternatives are not expected to impact fishery stock status. They would not allow for increased fishing effort or harvest levels of any species. Alternatives 1B, 1C, and 1D could affect when and where fishermen choose to fish. So for instance, some fishermen may decide to fish with approved alternative gear markings in TRP seasonal restricted areas instead of their current fishing locations. But again, this is not expected to impact any stocks. With the physical environment and EFH, there is expected to be no or negligible impact, and this is mainly because replacing a persistent buoy line with a gear marking alternative would not result in any physical interactions with the seafloor. For protected species, there are a lot of potential positives and potential negatives depending on when and where fishermen decide to use alternative gear marking, and if they are replacing their current fishing effort with this gear or simply utilizing latent effort to increase fishing. But in general, for protected species, fewer persistent buoy lines will reduce risk of serious injury and mortality from incidental entanglement. And because of that, alternatives 1B, 1C, and 1D could reduce the magnitude of negative impact of fixed gear on protected species. But that's only if fishermen are replacing their gear as opposed to only increasing effort. But I should also clarify that fishermen could only increase effort if there's latent effort, because this action, like I said, would not authorize additional effort. Also, gear with alternative markings do not necessarily eliminate the use of vertical lines when retrieving gear, and untimely releases of buoy lines, although uncommon, could result in vertical lines in the water. So we do need to acknowledge that this is not 100% risk-free. And also this could increase entanglement risk in seasonal restricted areas that currently do not have any vertical lines. But it's expected that if there is an increase in risk in these areas, there would be a decrease in risk elsewhere if fishermen are relocating their fishing effort. Alternative 1B, so allowing alternative gear marking in the entire region, would provide the most potential benefit to protected species because it would allow for the most widespread use of gear marking alternatives and thus the greatest possible reduction in persistent vertical buoy lines and entanglement risk. Alternative 1D would provide the second most benefit, followed by alternative 1C because it's expected that there would be less use of alternative gear markings if it was allowed in fewer areas and during shorter periods of time. And alternative 2B, which is to require knowledge demonstration, could have an indirect positive impact on protected species because it could reduce the amount of gear conflict, which could lead to ghost gear and then pose an entanglement risk to protected species. And then conversely, alternative 2A, so not requiring knowledge demonstration, could have a slight negative impact on protected species from entanglement with ghost gear that resulted from improper location marking and gear conflict. All right, so moving on to economic impacts. Because the use of gear marking alternatives would be completely optional, we'd expect that only fishermen who could make either the same profit or could increase their profits would choose to use gear marking alternatives. And the more opportunities fishermen have to use gear marking alternatives, the greater their ability to reduce costs associated with switching between fishing with traditional gear and gear with alternative surface markings. And because of this, we expect that the alternatives that provide more flexibility, such as allowing alternative marking in the entire region, would provide greater potential economic benefit to fishermen. And then lastly, requiring fishermen to demonstrate knowledge of gear marking alternatives prior to use, so with alternative 2B, would require fishermen to devote time to complete this requirement. However, it could also lead to more accurate gear location information and then reduce gear conflict, which could lead to less lost, displaced, and damaged gear. All right, so that was a lot, but this is also in the decision document that you have. So with that, I will end there and we can answer any questions you have. And we also invite any input or guidance you would like to provide on the further development of the action alternatives or the functional equivalence elements.
Thank you, Caroline. Any comments, inputs, questions from the council? Bobby Rule.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question I have will be the same one that I raised at the last time we had an update on this. Is what's it going to look like for participants that are not within the fishery that are trying to avoid the gear? What type of system do we have to put in place to be able to see the gear? And is it something that is it pay to play, or is it something that is going to be a free service, or is it a standalone piece of equipment they will have to use? That's something that's it's kind of a big issue for a lot of fisheries, especially some of the ones that I participate in that take that fish very close in proximity to fixed gear. So knowing where it's at is going to be crucial, and I'm certainly hoping that there's technological advances well beyond what I'm aware of, but I don't really know of anything that you can transpond from the ocean floor to a satellite to get a precise position. But maybe I could be wrong, but that's something that's it's one of the things I see as an issue with this is how do we avoid interactions from outside of the fishery itself between different fisheries? Thank you.
Yeah, so right now there are various different ways to visualize gear. So in the short term, we have individual apps. So different companies have their own apps that can visualize gear, but also Time Zero, which is a software-based chart plotter, and can display data from all the different gear manufacturers. And so, and then also Earth Ranger integrates gear location data from various on-demand systems, and they have a real-time display which is accessible on mobile devices.
Mike Penny.
Yeah, I mean, and thanks, Caroline. And I think, you know, a lot of this action is setting the stage for the future. Right? So I don't think, you know, if we implement this October 1st, then on October 2nd, we're going to have approved any systems for widespread use. The way I'm looking at this is sort of, you know, somewhat workable analogy is electronic vessel trip reports. So when the council said we want to move to EVTRs for everybody, the systems didn't necessarily exist, you know, widespread. They weren't necessarily worked through, but we basically set a reg, like in a year, you know, we're going to transition to EVTRs. And the regulation is really clear. The regulation says this report must be, this is the vessel trip report. This report must be entered into and submitted through a software application approved by NIMS. That's the regulation. And then you go to our website and you can see all of the different applications that have gone through the approval process, and that list is kind of evolving. And some of them are free, and some of them are paid, and some of them work on Apple, and some of them work on Android, and there's a variety of you know, technological solutions to submit EVTRs. And that's the way we kind of envision this happening. Like once we set up the regulations, then vendors who want to that are providing this gear will apply to us and demonstrate that their technology can be seen on chart plotters or, you know, on a free phone app. And then once we go through the review and make sure that everything that they claim is accurate, then once we approve it, it'll go on a list, and then the fixed gear fishermen will know what technologies, what vendors they can purchase from, and then we'll be able to maintain a list of, you know, for everybody else, here's how you see the gear, and these are the different options that you would use to be able to see where the gear is.
One thing I'm so confused on, if you're outside cell phone range, so then you have to move back into cell phone range to be able to upload everything. How is a boat, if Bobby's already been out 2 days before that boat went fishing that day, how is he going to be able to see it if it's not been uploaded to anything yet?
Right. So this goes back to the concept of timing, right? So if we want this to be a system that's functionally equivalent to current surface markings, there needs to be essentially a real-time system, which means that fishermen who are deploying this gear would have to have cellular or satellite connection to be able to share the location marking of the gear that they're deploying.
Mike Penny.
Yeah, and it also gets to, I think, you know, and these are legitimate choices that, you know, we hope the councils will consider and make. You know, Caroline, can you go back to the slide for the first alternatives? You know, the time and area. So, you know, there's different, and the text is really small, but, you know, the alternative 1C is the most limiting because those gear restricted areas under the lobster plan are known, and they're mostly inshore, and they're, you know, 3 to 4 months at a time. So the idea under 1C is the only places the on-demand gear would be in those areas and at those times. And so that makes it easier for, say, the mobile gear fleet to know when they need to be looking out for and potentially downloading information to find out where the on-demand gear is. Alternative 1B, the downside to that is the gear could be anywhere. And so, that's, I think, an issue for the council to consider and give us direction in terms of whether it should be more limited in time and space, or available for use anywhere, because there's pros and cons of both of those. I think for the mobile gear fleet or for everybody else, knowing, having more constrained and limited times and places where the on-demand gear might be, would be helpful. But then again, if you're a lobster fisherman, under 1B or 1C, you basically have to maintain 2 sets of gear. You'd have to maintain, you have to have your on-demand gear for when you want to fish in the gear restricted areas. But then if you're fishing the rest of the year or outside of that area, you need to have regular buoy gear. And so, like I said, pros and cons to that alternative, but it only partially gets to your point, Bobby. But I think the larger point is an important one too, in terms of do you have to download the information in advance, or will it be available to you real time while you're out, on the trip?
Bobby?
Well, me personally, looking at I mean, I don't disagree with the on-demand gear marking and the reasoning behind it, but I don't know if I'm more precautionary by nature or I'm just getting old and set in my ways. But to me, alternate 1C as presented there it's almost like a full-scale pilot. You're using a known area where you ideally, well, not ideally, you would have actually less interaction between different types of gear because it's a known area. And I don't doubt that in a few years this technology will be, it'll be old hat. It's no different than when we first got, started pulling the VTR, not VTRs, but the VMS and everything else. I mean, after there's always going to be, kinks to work out, but I would rather see it kind of worked out in a smaller area, more of a confined area. And, I'm not a pot fisherman, I'm not a lobster guy, but, I don't really have trouble with the idea of throwing something overboard without a string to pull it back. And hoping that a balloon's going to pop back up and bring me my gear. So I don't think you'll have a lot of issue with lobster guys wanting to maintain 2 sets of gear, especially, one is a proven technique, very simple, but the other one is, for one, it's cost prohibitive for that amount of gear that they would have to set up. And 2, I don't know how much faith they have in it. So, I mean, that may be a better approach, a more, more safer approach to kind of lead into it that way. Cause there's also going to be, with everything, it's no different than anything else we've seen. There's going to be unforeseen circumstances that we had no idea that was going to be a problem until it shows up. So, I don't disagree with the need and scope for it, but I would rather see it kind of rolled out incrementally than, coast-wide thing. And then, it could create a multitude of problems. I mean, you actually, technically, if a mobile gear fisherman catches fixed gear pots, there's liability issues. And if it wasn't done facetiously, and if you don't know where the gear is, where does the liability lie, and this and that? And not only that, it could be somebody that I don't want to go tow Wes up because I know he can beat me up. If he can catch me, I think I can run faster. But so I mean, I think there's a lot of unknowns with it, but I would just kind of err on the side of caution as we move forward with it.
I have a very good hole shot, Bobby, so you got to be careful about that. Any more questions, comments? Anything anybody else would like to see on this? Greg Hewitt?
Yeah, I'm just looking, on like the southeast region here, the New York Bight South. What's the advantage if there's 20 or 30 pots on one string and they have, a high flyer at each end of it? What's the advantage for the lobster guy to do this? We don't have the same amount of whales, I guess, as they have up north and everything. And, obviously they pot differently. They do, 3 or 4 on a string as opposed to 20 or 30 on a pot string. So I guess my question, Caroline, what would be the advantage for the lobster guy down here to do that?
Yeah, so the big advantage for this action for fishermen is just to give them access to areas that they currently can't fish in, right? And so if they aren't getting additional access by using alternative gear marking, then there might not be much benefit to them, except for the fact that maybe, okay, if they start investing in on-demand gear, maybe they don't want to be switching back and forth, and then they could just use their on-demand gear everywhere all the time, right? But yeah, unless they're getting access, then there might not be a huge benefit to them, but it would be completely optional, right?
Okay, thanks. I guess that kind of answers my question. I mean, most of the areas are, there's an unwritten rule. It's that, and I guess Wes will tell you this, and that's your area. You set up on it, and that's it up and down the coast. So I don't know what the advantage would be, and let's say, like I said, from the New York Bight south, but I can't speak for up north there, but I'm just looking at it from that perspective. Thank you, though.
Sonny?
Yeah, I think right now they're talking about the restricted areas, but what's the future look like? I mean, we're trying to rebuild the right whales to bigger stock. We're trying to get, stop the entanglements of all marine mammals. So this is probably, in my opinion, a start to what could expand in the future. Now, how far in the future, we don't know. But right now, as long as they're going to start with baby steps, and as the technology gets better and better, well, then they'll come up with something that you just can look on your phone, anybody can, and see your gear. I mean, if that's what the intention is to save the whales, it's the future.
Seeing no more hands around the table, Jerry Lehman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I've been fishing up here in the New England region alongside lobstermen trawling. I mean, I've participated in both fisheries for over 2 decades. But, a lot of the trawl fishermen out here, we lose cell service within 2 hours. We haven't even reached the fishing grounds yet. And if I'm gone out for 7 to 10 days, does this mean if we end up using these alternative markings, do all the trawl fishermen who participate in the offshore fishery, is this going to be mandatory that they put Starlink on their vessels, which comes as another added cost? I think Bobby was kind of hinting on this, and I think that's, kind of the rationale. And then if we end up doing the alternative markings, let's say with the gillnet gear, well, on top of that, I mean, I understand the apps. It's a great idea for an inshore fishery where you got cell service and towers, but it's 30 nautical miles before we even can get across the other side of Jeffrey's Ledge. And I can assure you that after about an hour and a half along the coast from Mass, New Hampshire, and Maine, you lose cell service. I just wanted to highlight that. I mean, granted, if we already know that these areas are already predestined at a certain time of the year, I'm just wondering, is it going to be a cost mandate back to the alternative gear markings from the lobsterman to have to pay for every other fisherman to find out where his gear is, or is that going to be a cost pushed on to the other fishermen? Thanks.
Yeah, so right now this would be completely optional, right, for fishermen to use this, and perhaps they would need internet capabilities if they were going to use this gear, to be able to market, to share gear location if it needs to be a real-time system. But I do believe that the Science Center will be getting a consultation report that looks at the next 10 years in the North Atlantic in terms of internet capabilities for different systems. And including Starlink, but also beyond just Starlink. And I think that the expectation is that costs are going to decrease drastically from what they are now. But others can correct me on that.
So Caroline, if this went into effect, say October 1st, just example, is it set up now that guys can go set their gear and the system's in place that boats can pick it up?
You mean whether people can see the gear?
Yes.
Yeah, so if they are using certain apps, so like for example, the Earth Ranger buoy app, that right now fishermen can use that and they can see where gear is deployed, and so they can avoid it. And so if you have internet capabilities, you set your gear and then it's pretty much in real time and it's marked there, and so it is a functioning system as of right now.
And has it been tested and does it work? What's the, I mean, does it work 50% of the time, 100% of the time? Do we not know?
I am not sure exactly how many times they've had issues with the visualization. I'd have to check with my colleagues at the Science Center on that.
Mike Penny?
Yeah, I think just to follow up, so we have been issuing over the last several years a number of exempted fishing permits for vessels to trial the on-demand gear and use that. And you know, the focus initially has been on improving the retrieval rate, the successful retrieval rate, so setting and retrieving the gear by the vessels using the on-demand gear. And in the last couple of years, you know, we're transitioning to making sure that the gear is visual, you know, is visually available. So the visualization of the gear, and that's where the Earth Ranger and the other apps come in. I believe that the fishermen, you know, primarily lobstermen, although some gill netters off the coast of Maine that are using on-demand gear are, you know, are seeing success rates around on the order of 90% in terms of being able to retrieve their gear. Maybe it's higher now. So I don't know if that was the success rate that you were talking about, Wes. But then we're continuing to work on and improve the visualization part of it. Wes, to your question, like if this was implemented on October 1st, would it be ready for use? And I think no, because in order for it to be ready for use, you know, I would need to approve the service and put it on a list like we did with the electronic vessel trip reporting software applications. And I think once we implement this, that'll start the process for vendors and developers to apply for approval. And that approval process is going to take some time. So before there's any systems available for use outside of exempted fishing permits, it's going to take some time after we implement the regs that authorize it. You know, we're kind of working on those somewhat in parallel. But I think ultimately it's going to depend on, like I said, vendors applying and demonstrating that they meet all the requirements to be considered you know, an alternative gear that provides the functional equivalency that Caroline spoke of.
Yeah, and I will just highlight again, like there's a lot of questions about how this system overall would work. And, you know, this action is just setting the foundation, right? It's just to allow this gear to be able to be used. And so it can be a bit challenging maybe, or difficult because there are so many questions about how, for example, the on-demand gear system is actually going to work.
Hayden?
And I just wanted to add that if you're looking for more specific information on what systems are being tested and what haul success rates have been in the experimental fishery, this was included in one of the prior protected resources newsletters for a council meeting this year, but there is a publication out about this work that's been going on from 2020 to 2023. So there are some results there. If you'd like to look at that, I can send it around.
Mike Denny.
Yeah, and maybe the last thing I'll just flag is that I think, one of the things we are looking for is we're looking for input on what should the criteria be for us to approve a system. Caroline mentioned a number of factors, detectability, retrievability, identification, enforceability, and viewing distance, set direction. So these are the things, if there are specific suggestions for what we should include in our list of criteria that the vendors have to demonstrate in order to be approved, we are certainly willing to hear that and take that into consideration as we move forward on this. We want to make sure that the system, when we approve it, that it's usable and practicable.
Anything further? Bobby?
Just real quick, I mean, one of the things, if that's the criteria you're looking for, one of the things that I would think would be important would be the resolution of it, the accuracy of it. Because in certain places that we fish with mobile gear versus, when you're fishing up against fixed gear, there's a big difference between 500 foot and 100 foot. So, that would be something that I think would be from the optics of non-pot fishermen to be able to see the gear. That would be something I think would be very important.
Sonny?
And no noise from whatever, puts a ping out so that they can see it. I'm imagining, unless they have other technology that I don't know about, but they have to have noise to send the noise out, and the more noise they have is not good for the marine environment.
Seeing no more hands. Caroline, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, let us move on to our final agenda item for the day. Acknowledgement of outgoing council members. We're going to be having 4 new faces around this table next year. Well, next, I guess, August term year, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, hopefully we'll have 4. We'll have to see. I'm going to start off with Peter Hughes. Peter is not here at the moment. He is being a wonderful nurse, apparently, at home, taking care of his wife, and all is well. The last I talked with Peter, and the council is going to acknowledge him at another meeting date when he can be here. Also, Dan Farnham, although he's not with us today, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge him. Dan stepped down from the council earlier this year after receiving a cancer diagnosis, and I'm happy to share that I was texting him yesterday morning, and he reports his treatment is going well. He was appointed to the council in 2020 and served with dedication for 4.5 years. Even before his appointment, he had long been involved in our work through the council's tall fish advisory panel. Throughout his time on the council, Dan's deep knowledge of the tall fish fishery and commercial fisheries added tremendous value to our discussions. His participation on the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel was also instrumental in advancing collaborative science, particularly through industry-based survey pilot project. Dan consistently brought a grounded, pragmatic perspective that helped bridge science and on-the-water realities, and his voice will be greatly missed around the table. And we will be sending him one of these things. Yep. And with that, I'd like to, acknowledge Dan very much. Now we'll move on to somebody that is here. Ken Neal. First, I would like to recognize and thank Ken Neal as he concludes his term as an at-large member of the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council representing the state of Virginia. Ken has served with dedication and distinction during his time on the council. Despite the demands of a busy professional life outside of our work here, he has consistently made time to contribute in meaningful and thoughtful ways. His commitment has not gone unnoticed. Ken's passion and insight have been invaluable, particularly when it comes to supporting and advancing recreational tilefish efforts. We're especially grateful for his willingness to go above and beyond in helping us spread the word about the private recreational tilefish permit and reporting requirements. His proactive approach and connections within the private recreational community has made a real difference in our outreach efforts. And of course, we can't thank him enough for the incredible fish photos, which he shared with us over the years, which, yeah, we saw one today or yesterday. Those images, many featuring tilefish and other fish, have helped bring our presentations and outreach products to life. Ken, thank you for your service to the council and your contributions to the management of our region's fisheries. Yep. Ugh.
Very retired.
And
That was my comment. It's been an honor. It's been a very eye-opening experience for me. I've learned a lot. The federal level is a whole lot different than the state level. You guys have to have the patience of Job. So this was this meeting was actually supposed to be on my 62nd birthday, on my retirement from my practice and retirement from fisheries management. It's all happening right now, and so I'm pretty excited about it. But it's been an honor.
So the party flag is officially up. Pick up now. I'm passing the mic to Mike. Elise.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have one more acknowledgement this afternoon, and that is our chairman, Wes Townsend. So I would like to say that it is an honor to recognize and thank Wes for his extraordinary service to the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council over the last 9 years. Wes was appointed to the council in 2016 and has served the maximum of 3 consecutive 3-year terms. Over that time, he's held key leadership roles, including 3 years as vice chair, and most recently 2 years as the council chair. Outside of the council meeting room, Wes has made important contributions as co-chair of the Northeast Trawl Advisory Panel for the past 4 years. In every role, Wes has brought thoughtful insight and on-the-water knowledge to our discussions that we've had around this table. As a commercial fisherman, Wes understands better than most that time away from the water comes at a cost. Yet he has never let that stand in the way of his commitment to this council. Wes has made it a priority to show up, listen, and contribute in meaningful ways. That dedication speaks volumes not only about his character, but also about his commitment to this work and the broader fishing community he represents. I'll just throw a little extra in there with that understood. So there was a time for which Wes was my vice chair when I was chairing, and I had personal issues that I had to deal with. And Wes, there wasn't a hesitation on his part ever when I turned to him to help. And that shows the kind of character, the caringness, the kindness that he embodies. So thank you for that, Wes. Wes's impact goes beyond policy and process. He consistently goes out of his way to make council members, staff, and other participants in the council process feel welcomed, respected, and appreciated. And of course, no tribute to Wes would be complete without a mention of the unforgettable seafood feasts he and his wife have so generously hosted during our meetings in Dewey Beach. Even though the Phillies lost last year, it was still fun. Those gatherings brought us together and reminded us of the community at the heart of the work that we do. Wes, thank you for your leadership, your generosity, and your unwavering dedication over the last 9 years. For someone who's been on this council now, this is my 15th year. Today would have been my 15 years ago I started on the council here today. So I know the sacrifice that those 9 years were for you. Your contributions have left a lasting mark, and we wish you all the best in whatever comes next, whether it's the store, on land, or at sea. Thank you for your contribution, Wes. And so, in gratitude and appreciation, the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council recognizes P. Weston Townsend for his distinguished service to the council and outstanding contribution to the conservation and management of our nation's marine fisheries resources. Thank you, Wes.
Thank you guys very much. It's been a quick 9 years. It's been a long 9 years. The last 2 years have been easy because all I do is sit up here and just ask how you guys want to vote. So my job has really been easy the last couple of years. But with that, thank you guys very much. Continued success. I won't be a stranger. I'll just be back there. Thank you. Okay, with that, we are done early for the day. And say we are planning on being at Skip's boat before 6 o'clock. We want to untie the ropes at 6. 5:45. 5:45, then we'll go with. And that is at, for those that don't know the directions, 200 Winston-Salem Drive Avenue. Same as Fifth Street. So just go that way. And what fishing center is it called? Virginia Beach Fishing Center. So that's easy enough. Any more announcements? No. Let's go here. All right. With that, that concludes today's agenda. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Bright and early at 9. Midday. But with that, we'll see everybody tonight and in the morning. Thank you.